If you're already a scrapbooker, you have a lot of the supplies that you need to start making cards. And that's how I started making cards, is using my scrapbooking supplies. I needed a card for somebody. I didn't want to drive to town and buy one, so I just started working with some of the materials that I had and just kept adding and adding and adding to it. I'm going to concentrate this video on working with things that scrapbookers typically have, maybe these first couple of videos, and then eventually get into some stamping. A lot of people, I think, believe that in order to make cards you have to be a stamper. That's not true necessarily. You can use a lot of the things that you use for scrapbooking. However, if you do have stamps and inks and work with those in your scrapbooking, those are great for your card making as well. But let's look at some of the materials that you probably already have and see how we can apply those to card making. We are going to need some cardstock. A good weight of cardstock, heavy weight, at least an 80-pound weight, is preferable. If you have 8.5 by 11 cardstock, that's wonderful, but as a scrapbooker, there's a good chance that what you have is 12 by 12 cardstock. And I'm going to show you in a few minutes the ways to cut this so that you can maximize your 12 by 12 sheet and still get standard size cards out of it. You will want some pattern paper, and for cards, I prefer, well, on my scrapbook pages now too, but especially for cards, I prefer a little bit weightier designer paper. It doesn't have to be printed on both sides, but those are usually heavier papers. But you want something that has some substance to it. These really thin papers, it kind of shows when you're doing a card because people are going to be picking that up and handling it more. So those I tend to stay away from. I use them to line envelopes and for some other things, but if you're picking your papers for your cards, go for your heavier, weightier papers. Now you can certainly use scraps. That is the perfect, cards are the perfect place to use up any scraps that you have of designer paper and other embellishments as well. And speaking of scraps and designer paper, some of the designer papers that we get have some really large prints, and some of them work really well on scrapbook pages, and others are awfully big prints and are difficult sometimes to work with on our scrapbook pages, but they're perfect for cards. So any of these that you can cut out, it's called fussy cutting when you're going around the edges, those are wonderful to use on cards. So you can see some of these I've already been cutting up quite a bit, but those are some of your papers that you can get a little more mileage out of by applying them to cards. Some of the things that are great for cards are rub-ons and stickers and chipboard letters. All of those things are great for cards. Particularly if you're not into stamping. When we talk about stamping in later videos, we'll emphasize greeting stamps and some of the things that you may want to invest in first. But if you don't have those kinds of things, you can probably find a lot of them in rub-ons that you have on hand or in some of your chipboard or stickers. A lot of times, even in a set like this that's been heavily used, there are enough letters in there to get something useful for a card. So we'll see how to do that a little later as well, and certainly, of course, in my new chipboard packs. Now, rub-ons, often, whether they're designed for scrapbooks or cards, often have a lot of things that work very well on a card. So there are, especially when, like this one says, for someone special, perfect for the front of a card. So there are a lot of things that I can use here. The only drawback to a rub-on, of course, is it's a one-shot deal, and you only get to make one card out of that particular rub-on, whereas if you were working with a stamp or something, you can make multiples. But you can still get some great cards out of those. Stickers, again, leftovers. This is the leftover sticker sheet, some things that I didn't use out of a collection. Those are wonderful. Any of your other embellishments, your ribbons, your buttons, all those kinds of things you can make use of on your cards. In fact, I didn't have much of a ribbon collection. I used it on scrapbook pages, but I didn't have a lot of a ribbon collection until I started making cards. But you probably have a few, and those, especially, again, the scraps, are wonderful for cards. Now, looking at tools, you're going to need a paper trimmer, which you already have if you're a scrapbooker. I use a guillotine type paper trimmer. Whatever kind of paper trimmer you use is fine. If you have punches, those are great for your cards. And I'm going to show you a card using some circle punches. You can use your border punches. Pull out your punches. Those are wonderful for cards. One tool that you may not have if you're a scrapbooker that you might want to get at some point is a bone folder. And you'll see in a moment where I use the bone folder. If you don't have a bone folder or don't want to make any investment right now, that's fine. You can use the edge of a ruler. So you just need a ruler. One of those wooden rulers with the metal edge is really handy, or any kind of ruler would work for what we're going to be using this bone folder for. Alright, let's talk about cutting your background, your card base, and the standard size of a card. Because there's one other supply that you're going to need that you may not have, and that is an envelope. What determines the size of your card is really what envelopes you have, or envelopes that you buy. The standard size envelope is an A2 envelope. It is 4 3/8 inch wide by 5 5/8 inch long. And what that means is that the card that goes inside is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. Now, how we get a card that size, if you have an 8 1/2 by 11 sheet of paper, it's very easy. You just cut the paper in half crossways. So the 11 1/2 inch length, you cut it at 5 1/2 and fold it. Or you can cut it long ways. It's 8 1/2 inches wide. You can cut it at 4 1/4 over and fold it. And I've already cut some pieces. I have one here that was cut. We'll take this one first. It's the most common way of cutting it. This one I cut out of a piece of white cardstock, and I cut halfway on the long side. So I have a 5 1/2 inch wide by 8 1/2 inch long. And when I fold the ends together and make a crease, and that's where the bone folder comes in, but you could use a ruler for that. Then I have the standard size card that will fit inside this envelope. Okay? So that's going to be my card base. Now the other way I can cut the 8 1/2 by 11 is 4 1/4 inches wide. So I'm cutting off of the short, cutting down the long length of the paper. And I can fold this over and use my bone folder there. When you're folding paper that's cut in this direction, it's a little harder to fold. If you have a scoring blade on your cutting device, your paper cutter, then that's a good place for to use that to score this edge before you fold it, so it folds very neatly. This particular cardstock isn't quite as heavy, so it folded pretty neatly for me. But I have two different kinds of cards now, whether there's a side fold or a top fold, either one. And those are the standard sizes. Now, of course, if you buy envelopes in different sizes, you can make your cards in different sizes. And this is a pack of note cards that came with envelopes that I bought, and I've used those quite a bit. They finished out 5 by 6 1/2. You can buy lots of different sizes, but what I've found the most of is the envelopes in this A2 size. If you're buying envelopes by themselves, that's kind of the standard size card. Now, if you don't have 8 1/2 by 11 paper and you have 12 by 12 paper, what most of us scrapbookers have, then you want to cut this and get the most out of it. So let's look at a couple of different ways that you can cut the paper and get the sizes that you want. Okay, so I've taken my 12 by 12 piece of craft cardstock and I've cut 1 inch off the bottom to give me an 11 inch long by 12 inch wide piece, and then I cut a strip 4 inches wide. Now, a while ago I told you that the standard size card was 4 1/4 inches wide, but if I cut this 4 1/4, I'm not going to get the most out of my cardstock. So if I just trim it down just a little bit more and make it 4 inches wide, then I can have the same kind of tent folded card, and there's very little, nobody's really going to notice that difference, and you'll get 3 cards out of 1 piece. So the remaining piece here that's 8 inches wide by 11 inches long, I could cut it in half vertically and have 3 of these kind of tent cards out of the piece, or I could cut it the other way and have a card folded like this one. Again, it's only going to be 4 inches wide instead of 4 1/4, but that's not going to make a huge amount of difference. So if you have 12 by 12 paper, you can get 3 cards out of a sheet of 12 by 12. Thank you for watching this video. If you'll come back for the second video, I'm going to show you some cards, and we're going to make a card using some of the tools and supplies that we've already talked about. Thank you.